What if knowledge wasn't just power, but a curse? What if a single book could awaken something buried beneath centuries of silence? And what if the man who dared to teach the forbidden was never truly alone? This is the story of Elias, the slave who smuggled 500 forbidden books into a plantation and unlocked a darkness no one could name. In the damp breath of dawn, when mist still clung to the earth like the remnants of forgotten dreams, a lone figure moved quietly through the cotton fields. His name was Elias, a man born in bondage, his back scarred by years of labor, his spirit tempered by a fire no overseer could ever extinguish, curiosity. He spoke little, not from fear, but reverence. Words he'd learned carried weight. That morning in 1842, as crows whispered from the fence posts and the soil steamed with night's moisture, Elias carried something beneath his shirt. Not a tool. Not a stolen crust of bread. A book. Its leather binding cracked, its pages swollen from age and neglect. He'd taken it from the attic of the old main house, a place claimed by mildew, silence, and forgotten memories. The book had no title on its spine, only strange letters burned into its cover, foreign, ancient, alive. Elias couldn't read yet, not truly, but he recognized patterns, symbols that pulsed with meaning. And in that attic, beneath dust-shrouded furniture and time-worn sheets, he had discovered trunks upon trunks of books. Hundreds, perhaps more. Some written in English. Others whispered in languages that stirred something deep inside him, like the echo of a name spoken in a dream. He hadn't meant to find them. He had gone seeking firewood to survive the cold nights. But once he found that first trunk, his hunger changed. He began to return, always in darkness, always in silence. His hands grew deft at hiding and carrying. He began to share what he'd seen with the children, those whose spirits hadn't yet been crushed by the lash. He drew letters in the dirt, carved them into bark, and the children repeated them like hymns. Soon, even the elders gathered to listen. Those who once said knowledge belonged only to the white world now leaned closer, their disbelief melting into awe. But with knowledge came echoes. At night, Elias heard them, soft groans from the wood above the slave quarters. Doors creaking open when the wind was still. Footsteps that left no prints. He told himself it was imagination. Houses moaned. Trees shifted. But each time he closed the attic hatch, he swore he heard pages turning behind him, slowly, deliberately, as if the books were reading themselves. The oldest among them whispered of the plantation's first master, a man long dead. They said he'd brought the books from across the sea. A strange man, who read beneath blood moons and carved symbols into the floorboards before vanishing one winter, locked forever in that attic. And now Elias was there, kneeling where those boards still creaked, surrounded by volumes that seemed to breathe. One book in particular always watched him, a black tome with a single symbol on its cover, a circle with 3 vertical lines. It never gathered dust. It never moved. But Elias could feel it waiting. When the overseer's whistle split the morning air, Elias tucked the book beneath his shirt and returned to the fields. But something felt wrong. The air had changed, thicker, colder, as though something had followed him from the attic. His pulse matched the silent rhythm of turning pages that weren't there. Beyond the edge of the fields lay a forgotten place, a dried cistern swallowed by ivy and superstition. The white men called it cursed ground. To Elias, it was sanctuary. He had found it once while fleeing punishment, a door half buried in the soil, opening into a chamber of ancient cold, the kind that clung not to air but to memory. One by one, beneath moonless skies, Elias carried the books there. Wrapped in cloth, masked with ash, hidden from the dogs that had begun to growl without reason. Within weeks, he had built something sacred. Shelves from stolen fence planks. Candle stubs flickering weakly in the corners. They called it the listening room. Not because Elias named it so, but because everyone who entered said the same thing. The walls listened. Whispers echoed long after voices stopped. Sometimes, even alone, they heard reading, low, deliberate, ancient. It was there Elias began to teach. With sand, coal, and patience he showed them letters. Words. Sentences. The first thing each student learned was their own name, spoken, written, reborn. Their names took shape like spells cast aloud for the first time. But something else listened too. It began with Jonah, a boy too bright for his own good. He learned to read in days. One night, he found a book no one was meant to find, thin, bound in gray hide, unmarked. Before Elias could stop him, Jonah read aloud from it. The candlelight shuddered. The air thickened. Then Jonah fell silent. He still breathed, still moved, but his eyes were blank. His mouth hung open, wordless, as if waiting for someone to write inside him. Elias buried the book behind a wall of stone, sealing it with oil-soaked boards. He burned symbols into the dirt and forbade anyone from speaking its name. But the listening room had changed. The ground began to pulse. Shadows stretched too long. The air grew colder when certain pages were read. Then one night the black book, the one with the circle and 3 lines, appeared atop the pile, damp as though pulled from a well. Elias carried it deep into the woods, buried it beneath a cairn of stones. But it came back. When he returned, it waited for him in the center of the room, pages slightly open, as if something inside had been breathing. The others began to ask questions Elias couldn't answer. Why did the earth smell of iron? Why did the light bend when they read aloud? Why did their shadows move when they didn't? Elias told them to focus, to learn. That knowledge was the only weapon no master could strip from them. But at night, his dreams betrayed him. He saw symbols drawn in blood. Chains breaking not by hand, but by voice. And always that same mark, a circle with 3 vertical lines. Then came Talia, clever, fearless, the last to lose her faith. One night she stayed behind to study longer. When Elias returned at dawn, she was gone. Only her name remained, etched into the wall, carved with impossible precision, letters cut deep into stone. He covered it with cloth, burned sage he didn't understand, and prayed to gods he no longer remembered. But somewhere deep beneath the plantation, the walls whispered her name back. The listening room had become more than a library. It was a vessel, a mouth waiting to speak. And Elias, though he would never admit it aloud, had begun to suspect that the books weren't teaching them something new. They were reminding them of something ancient. For 3 days rain had fallen without pause. The fields were drowned, the roots bled water, and the world outside lay muted in a heavy, endless gray. The overseers grew restless, men with too much cruelty and too little to occupy it. But underground, in the hollow of stone and whispering air, the listening room thrived. The damp never reached it. The books remained dry, untouched by mold. The air was cool, steady, almost aware. Elias sat among the shelves, fingers tracing the spines as if memorizing them by touch alone. Most were books of history, scripture, and science. But some were stranger, compendiums of symbols, maps of cities that did not exist, diaries written in the syntax of dreams. And among them, Elias found the nameless one. It was bound in a material darker than leather, smoother than skin, firm but unyielding. No title. No markings. Yet its very presence pressed on the air like a storm about to break. Those who came near it felt their flesh prickle and their stomachs twist. Elias didn't open it at first. He placed it on a stone ledge apart from the others. But it never gathered dust. Its surface remained clean, breathing, almost polished, as if something beneath the cover waited. Then came the dream. Whispering voices. Hollow eyes. A chorus that spoke his name backwards. He woke with sweat cold on his neck, heart pounding, and before the candle burned out, he did the thing he had promised himself never to do. He opened it. Inside were no words, only drawings. Glyphs. Spirals and fractals, circles within circles, repeating endlessly. Some shapes resembled eyes, others mouths. One page showed a kneeling man bound by chains before a towering, faceless shadow. Another showed a figure surrounded by books, each with hands instead of pages, reaching outward. Elias couldn't read them. But he felt them. The symbols hummed beneath his skin like veins beneath light. That night, he dreamed of Jonah, the boy who'd fallen silent. Jonah stood at the edge of the cistern, eyes pure white, lips moving in reverse. Behind him stood Talia, her skin cracked and pale like weathered marble. They didn't speak, but they beckoned. Downward. Always downward. Elias woke with the book still open in his lap, and a mark burned into his palm. A circle crossed by 3 vertical lines. He wrapped it in cloth, hid it, but the pain throbbed beneath every heartbeat. The others noticed his silence. They asked what he had read. He lied. But that night, one of the men, a skeptic named Reuben, slipped into the listening room alone. He had watched Elias avoid the nameless book, seen the fear in his eyes, and curiosity took root where caution should have lived. They found Reuben the next morning at the edge of the woods, barefoot, shivering, mouth filled with dirt. He was alive, but his voice was gone, his eyes locked on something deep within the trees. When asked what he'd seen, he only trembled. Elias sealed the book again. Wrapped it in oil-soaked cloth, buried it beneath the floorboards, surrounded it with river stones and crushed bones from the kitchen refuse. But even beneath the earth, it called, not with words but with pressure. A weight behind his eyes, a pulse beneath every thought. He began to hear pages turning in the dark when no one was there. He found new sentences scrawled in the margins of other books, lines he had not written. Do not teach them to speak what was sealed. The ink remembers. You open the mouth. Symbols appeared in the soil outside the listening room, perfect circles drawn without footsteps. Still, the lessons continued. Elias told himself knowledge was salvation. But a shadow had begun to grow among the pages, a language older than language, leaking between letters. They were learning things no one had meant to teach. And Elias began to understand. The book had not been written. It had been born. And once opened, it would never close again. Autumn came without warning. One morning, the sky simply turned gray, and the air smelled of iron and old rain. The trees shed their leaves too quickly. The ground became a brittle quilt that whispered when walked upon. The plantation grew quiet. Fewer whippings. Fewer guests. The master rarely emerged, claiming illness. But the servants knew better. He was listening. Elias felt the change before he saw it. The listening room had deepened, not in space, but in presence. The steps down seemed longer now. The air hung heavier, like mist that clung to bone. Candles burned too quickly, their wax pooling into shapes that looked almost human. Some refused to stay lit at all. And then, the names began. It was Jonah who noticed first, though he still could not speak. He simply pointed, trembling, to a spot in the stone wall. There, faint but unmistakable, carved with inhuman precision, was a name, Talia. Below it another Elias. And then more, etched in a perfect, descending line. Reuben. Miriam. Isaiah. Every one of them who had entered the listening room. Every one who had read. Elias tried to erase them. He used knives, then fire, even lime scraped from the brick. Each time, the names vanished briefly, then returned by morning, carved deeper. New names appeared overnight, some belonging to the living, others to people who had never set foot inside. It was a record, or perhaps a prophecy. Whispers accompanied each new name. Not words, but tones, low, resonant, curling in the ears like breath too close to the skin. Then Elias understood, the language of the books was never meant to be read aloud. It was meant to be heard. The others grew fearful. Some begged him to stop teaching. Others left offerings at the door of the listening room, salt, ash, animal teeth. One man hanged himself behind the barn. When they found him, his mouth was sewn shut with pages torn from a book. His name was missing from the wall. Elias pressed on. He had passed beyond denial. The books were alive, but so was knowledge. Perhaps they were one and the same. He began transcribing the glyphs from the nameless book, not to read them, but to map them, to understand their order. Patterns emerged. Certain symbols clustered near certain names. Some names bore marks beside them, small etchings like stars. A few were crossed out entirely. Then came the night of the fire. A spark caught in the overseer's shed. Flames leapt to the dry brush, spreading fast. Men shouted, buckets clattered, chaos churned. But the fire did not move toward the fields. It moved, impossibly, in a straight line, toward the cistern. Toward the listening room. Elias ran. The door was hot beneath his hand. Smoke bled from the cracks. Inside, shelves burned like ribs of some dying creature. Books twisted and blackened, pages curling into ash that floated like moths. But some volumes did not burn. The nameless book lay untouched, its surface slick with something darker than water. And in the center of the room stood Jonah, still silent, eyes reflecting the fire. He did not move. Elias dragged him out. The flames did not touch the boy. When dawn came, the ashes cooled, but the walls remained standing. Blackened, yes, but intact. And upon them, the names still gleamed, cut deeper, sharper. At the very bottom, a new one had appeared, the Master's. And beneath that, another. A name no one could read. A name that pulsed in the skull like a heartbeat buried in the earth. That night, the slaves gathered, not in mourning, not in fear, but in understanding. Something had marked them, counted them, weighed them. The fire had not tried to destroy the listening room. It had tried to purify it. Or awaken it. Elias knew then, whatever had lived in the books now lived beyond them. It was in the walls. In the names. In them. By winter, the plantation fell silent. Too silent. The air hung motionless. Even the trees seemed frozen mid-breath, their bark split like dry lips, straining to speak. Ice spread across windows and barrels in delicate webs, as though something unseen had traced its fingers there in the night. The Master no longer left his quarters. Servants who entered came out pale and trembling. Some refused to speak. Others simply vanished. Their belongings remained. Their names appeared on the wall before anyone noticed they were gone. Elias no longer taught. He no longer slept. He spent his nights among the ruins of the listening room, a charred vault that defied time. Dust never settled. Ash never cooled. Some books survived, preserved by forces unnamed. But the nameless book had changed. Its pages began to write themselves. Symbols appeared in the dark, etched by invisible hands, shifting, rearranging, pulsing like breath. The ink smelled faintly of iron and earth. Elias read what he could. The words were not his, but they knew him. He dreamed of places, not people. Cities drowned in salt. Staircases that spiraled into silence. Stone rooms where voices lingered long after their bodies were gone. He dreamed of the book not as an object, but as a gate, a trembling membrane between thought and form. The others still came to him, but not for learning. They came seeking meaning, names, answers. He gave what he could. He read the walls. He whispered what could not be spoken. And in that whispering grew a truth. Older than chains, deeper than rebellion. One evening, the Master sent for him. A message written on torn parchment, folded twice, marked with the same sigil that adorned the black book, a circle intersected by 3 lines. Elias entered the house at dusk. The air was suffocating, curtains drawn, mirrors veiled. The Master sat in a chair, thinner than Elias remembered, his skin stretched tight over bone. He held no weapon. Only a book, bound in the same dark cloth. "You opened it," the Master rasped. "It remembered you." He explained little. He didn't need to. Elias already understood. The books were never written. They were found, in ruins, in wrecks, in the hands of the dead. They were not meant for reading. They were seals. Warnings. The Master had kept them hidden, knowing their danger. But the seals had grown restless. They needed minds. They needed mouths. And Elias had given them both. The Master died before dawn, quietly, without struggle. His final breath faded as his fingers touched the open page. When the air left his lungs, the ink on the book disappeared. Elias did not bury him. He left the body in the chair for the others to find. Then he walked back to the listening room, no longer a ruin, nor a sanctuary, but something else entirely. The book was waiting. Its final pages had turned blank again. Elias sat before it. His hands did not tremble. Around him, the walls began to whisper, His name, their names, and the one name no human tongue could pronounce. A name that waited beneath the skin of the world. Elias opened the book one final time. And the listening room breathed.